Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Indian Council of World Affairs, I welcome you all to the 47th Sapru House lecture to be delivered by His Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis, President of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, on the theme Multilateralism for Peace, Prosperity, Progress and Sustainability. We begin our program with welcome remarks by the chair for today's event, Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, Director General ICWA, followed by remarks by Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj, Permanent Representative of India to the United Nations. Thereafter, His Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis, will deliver the 47th Sapru House lecture. The lecture will be followed by a Q&A session moderated by the chair. May I now request Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, DG ICWA, to kindly make her remarks.
His Excellency Dr. Dennis Francis, President of the UN General Assembly, Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj, Permanent Representative of India to the United Nations, Shri Muktesh Pardesi, Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, Heads of Missions, members of the Diplomatic Corps and UN agencies, distinguished guests, members of the media, and dear students. On behalf of all present here, I warmly welcome His Excellency Dr. Dennis Francis, President of the UN General Assembly, for the 47th Sapru House lecture to the Indian Council of World Affairs, ICWA, which is India's oldest foreign policy think tank. It was established in 1943 and was declared as an institute of national importance by an Act of Parliament in 2001. His Excellency Dr. Dennis Francis has had an impressive 40 years career of being a diplomat and representing his country, Trinidad and Tobago, in several capacities, including as the permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva, to the World Trade Organization. He was also accredited to the UN specialized agencies based in Rome and Vienna, as well as to the International Seabed Authority. He has participated in negotiations on several crucial issues on the global agenda: SDGs, climate change, trade, maritime resources, among others. This in-depth knowledge of the working of UN institutions and familiarity with its very wide-ranging agenda is a rarity. Excellency, we are honored to have you here with us to speak on the topic Multilateralism for Peace, Progress, Prosperity and Sustainability. Multilateralism is indeed the way forward to deal with cross-national and cross-domain global challenges, yet global institutions today are faced with questions about their credibility and effectiveness. Set up 75 years ago, there are strong voices for the reform of the United Nations and the expansion of the UN Security Council, with the focus of increasing representation from developing countries in it. India just completed a successful presidency of the G20 under the vision One Earth, One Family, One Future. Prior to the G20 summit, India hosted the Global South Summit, in which 125 countries participated. After hearing their views, India succeeded in channelizing their concerns and aspirations into the G20 platform. Also, during India's presidency, African Union was admitted as a member of G20, bringing into the G20 conversations the voice of an entire continent. India believes that progress should be human-centric, and in this context, the implementation of SDGs needs to be put back on track. India's own vision for its growth and its various national flagship programs are in sync with the spirit of achieving the 2030 SDG agenda. On climate action, India's International Solar Alliance and the Global Biofuel Alliance are reflective of its green approach. Lifestyle for Environment, LIFE initiative launched by Prime Minister Modi aims to be a mass movement to nudge individuals and communities to protect and preserve the environment. On the women agenda, India is moving to women-led development, an approach that sees women as active participants and leaders in the development process. A Constitutional Amendment Act was passed, providing reservation of 1/3 of seats in parliament for women, and is a testament of the empowerment of its women, what we call Nari Shakti. And Excellency, today on dais you have two Indian women with you. But speaking on behalf of everyone, we all are looking forward to your lecture, Excellency, and to the views of Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj. May I now request Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj to make her remarks.
The President of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Dennis Francis, the Director General of the ICWA, Ms. Vijay Thakur Singh, and to the members of this most distinguished audience, good afternoon. Well, it isn't enough to talk about peace. One must believe in it. And it isn't enough to believe in it. One must work at it. Today, as we gather under the theme of multilateralism and peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability, we are not just discussing peace, we are committing to it, believing in it, and most importantly, working towards it. In an era where challenges are global and intertwined, our resolve to act in concert has never been more critical. And India, as a land where ancient wisdom coalesces with modern aspirations, embodies the spirit of multilateralism. We've always believed that unity in variety is the plan of the universe. This ethos resonates with our active engagement in the United Nations, from peacekeeping missions to sustainable development endeavors, echoing our commitment to collective progress and global harmony. In the context of UNGA 78, with its aptly chosen theme focused on building trust and reigniting global solidarity, we recognize the pressing need to bridge the trust deficit that looms over contemporary geopolitics. This theme is a clarion call by you, Mr. President, for us to forge a path of cooperation and understanding, transcending the divides that hinder our collective quest for a better world. And as we delve into the theme of multilateralism, it is imperative to recognize its pivotal role in shaping a world of peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability. Multilateralism is not, if I may say so, merely a diplomatic tool, but a lighthouse of hope for addressing global challenges such as climate change, poverty, health crises, and conflicts. Our collective efforts at the United Nations symbolize, hence, a commitment to not just dialogue, but to actionable strategies that transcend borders and unite us in our common humanity. India's participation in multilateral frameworks reaffirms our dedication to these universal goals. By embracing multilateral cooperation, we not only pave the way for a more equitable world, but also ensure the sustainability of our planet for future generations. It is thus our honor to welcome you, Mr. President, to India, a nation that holds the UN ideals close to its heart. Your visit is akin to a homecoming, if I may say so, a return to a place where trust, friendship, and a common vision for a brighter future are not just ideals, but lived realities. The UN's focus this year on the Summit of the Future, an initiative to reimagine and revitalize the United Nations, a UN 2.0, if you will, is a testament to our shared commitment to adapt and evolve. This pivotal moment in history does indeed call for a renewed United Nations, one that responds effectively to the ever-changing landscape of global needs and aspirations. We simply cannot afford to fail. A former United Nations Secretary General is on record, and I will quote him: "We may have different religions, different languages, different colored skin, but we all belong to one human race," unquote. This profound truth guides us as we converge on the ideals of the United Nations, aiming for a future where peace and prosperity are not just aspirations, but realities for all. Our discussions today, centered around the theme multilateralism for peace, progress, prosperity, and sustainability, hold significant importance as we explore pathways towards a revitalized and increasingly responsive United Nations. It is the hope that we might shape a future where trust is restored, solidarity prevails, and every individual thrives in peace and dignity. India, I assure you, Mr. President, will not be found wanting in this regard. Thank you once again, Mr. President, for joining us in this significant endeavor towards a world marked by peace and unity. It is now my honor to hand over the podium to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Your Excellency Ruchira, Kamboj, Permanent Representative of India to the United Nations, Your Excellency Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, Director General of the Indian Council of World Affairs, Excellencies, distinguished participants. Let me begin by expressing my deepest appreciation to Ambassador Singh's generous invitation to join you today and for her kind introduction. It is indeed an honor to address this renowned Indian Council of World Affairs. As India's first independent international affairs think tank, the Council has unmatched standing on the global political landscape, and I look forward to hearing your views and recommendations for addressing today's global state of affairs. Exactly 70 years ago, India's Vijay Lakshmi Pandit became the first woman to serve as President of the United Nations General Assembly. I am therefore privileged to lean on her pioneering shoulders as one among the woefully low number of female presidents of the Assembly in 78 years. When I assumed the presidency of the General Assembly last September, I made a pledge to reignite solidarity and to renew trust in multilateralism. I am under no illusion regarding the significant challenges of delivering that pledge. In the last year alone, military takeovers have repeatedly supplanted established orders across Western Africa. The war of aggression against Ukraine has entered another bloody chapter, and Haiti has descended into lawlessness, while violent conflicts persist in such places as Yemen, Myanmar, and the Sudan, resulting in massive internal human displacement. 1 month into my tenure, the international community was rocked yet again by another major phase of the conflict in the Middle East. The horrific escalation of violence since the 7th October attacks on Israel has further eroded trust between and among nations, triggered a humanitarian catastrophe in the Gaza Strip, and heightened security concerns throughout the world, particularly as it relates to the potential for regionalization of the war. Meanwhile, ever-present threats linked to climate change, sea level rise, and the unsustainable consumption and production patterns continue to create new layers of complexity. Taken together, these dynamics are undermining the cohesion we need to uphold international law, including the UN Charter, the backbone of our multilateral system. To change course, while we must recognize these dynamics as being essentially centrifugal in character. Our response, our collective response, must instead treat them as unifying forces. In the General Assembly, which is often referred to as the Parliament of Humanity, we are working to match our ambition with action at the scale and the pace needed to make a meaningful difference in the lives of people and communities across the globe. I am confident that together we can and will prevail. For these reasons, I have anchored my presidency in the belief that we are more effective when we work together, harnessing the immense power of multilateralism to secure and deliver peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all people everywhere. Let me turn first to peace. Perhaps nowhere are the dynamics of division on more visceral display than in Gaza, where the crisis, now over 100 days, has shocked all of us across the globe. With half the population nearing starvation and a public health catastrophe unfolding, legitimate questions are being raised over what it would take to stop the carnage and to save and sustain human life. India's delivery of humanitarian goods and medical supplies to those affected by the circumstances is highly valued and appreciated, as are India's insistent calls for peace in the Middle East, Ukraine, and elsewhere across the world. Indeed, peace is the cornerstone upon which everything else is built, offering a stable and enabling environment in which all nations can thrive, bound by the unifying principles of the UN Charter, namely sovereign equality, territorial integrity, political independence, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. The UN must work tirelessly to translate these principles into reality on the ground. From sending the first ever all-woman contingent of peacekeepers in Liberia, in large part thanks to India, to its involvement in peace negotiations in Colombia and Timor-Leste, the UN has been rightly ambitious in its promotion and defense of peace at the centerpiece of its mission. I applaud and commend India as one of the largest troop contributors to UN peacekeeping operations. Moreover, India has also contributed more personnel to UN peacekeeping than any other country since the beginning of these peace endeavors, demonstrating a high level of commitment to protecting lives and keeping the peace. Over the decades, thousands of your communities have bid farewell to Blue Helmets, the beating heart of the UN's commitment to a peaceful world, and counted the days to their return. Turning to prosperity, we know that the path to sustainable peace is forged collectively through sustainable development. Yet we are off track on every goal of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I repeat, every goal. Extreme poverty is on the rise after years of decline, while hunger and food insecurity are again surging. Despite these adverse headwinds, last September, world leaders at the UN still registered a hard-won triumph of unity over division. The political declaration adopted at the 2023 Sustainable Development Goals Summit reaffirmed the shared pledge to lift millions from poverty and, importantly, set out commitments to accelerate action to that end. The declaration made clear that we can no longer ignore the pressing need to reform our global financial institutions. We simply must close the financing gap, inhibiting faster implementation of the SDGs. In addition, we must update the way we measure prosperity, looking beyond GDP to a metric that captures the multidimensional nature of vulnerability and facilitates access to development resources on better, more affordable terms in order to avoid the crushing weight of debt overload in the global south. Further, we must prevent the debt crisis from becoming a development catastrophe. The Fourth International Conference on Financing for Development in 2025 will be a key moment to tackle these issues. I highly commend India's flagship programs, which aim to deliver upon the 2030 Agenda's goals at local, subnational, and national levels. What's more, India's model can be adapted and applied elsewhere. India's leadership in the field of digital public infrastructure, from innovative governance systems to citizen-oriented services, represents unparalleled transformation in action. I am confident that with the benefit of India's extraordinary experience and its continued engagement across all fronts, we can bring progress in attaining the SDGs back on track. On that note, a word on progress. A critical measure of our advancement will hinge on how well we level the playing field. This is especially true for women, who are less likely to work in formal employment. We stand little chance of achieving the SDGs with half the global population relegated to the sidelines, left out and locked out from participating in the economic and social life of the communities of which they are an integral part. I have therefore made gender equality and women's empowerment a priority of my presidency, and I am committed to rallying all member states around this issue. In this regard, the ever-increasing profile and participation of women in India's revolutionary transformation based on public policy is worthy of note, and I encourage the authorities to remain steadfast in that trajectory, given its potential to empower the SDGs. To that end, I have appointed a special advisor on gender equality and women's empowerment, who is with me on this important visit. And so I'd like to ask Ambassador Keisha Maguire to stand and be acknowledged as my Thank you. And I have re-established the Advisory Board on Gender Equality to assist me with policy ideas and practical measures to mainstream a gender perspective across the priorities of the General Assembly. Is this enough? No. No, it's not enough. And I will aggressively seek more opportunities for the empowerment of women and girls. But these are important steps I can take to push back against the trends eroding the rights of women and girls, including, in the latter case, the right to education, all of which imperil trust in the multilateral system. As you may recall, we recently commemorated the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as you would know better than I, it was India's delegate, Hansa Mehta, a staunch defender of equal rights for women in the 1940s, who made history by insisting on changing the phrase, "all men are born free and equal," to "all human beings are born free and equal," in the Declaration's often quoted and now famous Article 1. Her contribution is one of the many ways India has championed respect for human rights, and I count on India's continued writing narratives that showcase women's leadership, including through women-led development. On sustainability, of course, there have been setbacks on our shared journey to create a more equal, more sustainable world. From the COVID-19 pandemic and the impacts of climate change to the debt crisis and persistent disparities in everything, spanning health, education, and digital connectivity sectors, today's global challenges are simply too great for any one nation to tackle. It is often said that adversity breeds resilience. And there have been examples of tremendous ingenuity and solidarity along the way, especially in the global south. I commend India for its generosity in exporting vaccines to over 150 countries during the pandemic and championing sustainable recovery through its successful chairmanship of the G20. I continue to hear the loudest demands for progress from the young people whom I regularly meet, including at COP28 and on my other official visits. As the Dubai Consensus makes clear, we need ample, predictable financing to enact the necessary reforms. Natural disasters are increasing in frequency and intensity, while sea level rise is fast becoming an existential threat, especially for small island developing states like my own country of origin, Trinidad and Tobago. We simply must meet the demand to observe the 1.5-degree threshold for temperature rise. We glimpsed instances of leadership at COP28 in the capitalization of the Loss and Damage Fund. But as policy and decision makers, we simply must do more and act with a greater sense of urgency. A final word on multilateralism itself. As you know, many continue to question the relevance and ability of the multilateral system to effectively deliver real results in people's lives. And yet, we continually resort to multilateralism, time and again, because of the very nature of the process itself, as one that, in principle, gives voice to all countries in shaping global policy. Underpinning all our work, and an issue which I know is close to India's heart, is the urgent need for reform of the multilateral system. Let us face the facts. It is no longer 1945. Our institutions cannot remain stuck in the past and at the same time hope to fix the challenges of today using a toolkit of yesterday. The call to reform the Security Council was again raised by a resounding number of world leaders at the opening of the General Assembly's 78th session. This is a clear political signal of the need to change, and there is a UN process in place to achieve that goal, famously referred to as the IGN, the Intergovernmental Negotiations. While it is true that formal negotiations have yet to begin in earnest, such a decision requiring a broad consensus among members, for many delegations, the sluggish pace towards formal engagement leave much to be desired. I thank India for its continued active engagement to breathe new directional life into this urgently needed process. I should like to acknowledge the efforts of Ms. Ruchira Kamboj, the permanent representative of India to the UN, for bringing this important discussion to multiple platforms in New York, as evidenced by the important informal exchange I attended last December. Colleagues, my dear friends, despite the stark realities, our challenges are certainly not insurmountable. There are opportunities to harness in 2024 and in the years ahead. Foremost among them is the Summit of the Future in September, where leaders are expected to forge a new global consensus on how to strengthen the multilateral system, thus fast-tracking the SDGs, and importantly, holding member states more accountable to their commitments. As President of the General Assembly, I have prioritized this process, and from now until September, preparations will be at the center of our attention. In that connection, in April, I will also hold the first ever Sustainability Week, a flagship event of my presidency and an important stepping stone on our path to a sustainable future, featuring transport, tourism, infrastructure, energy, and debt sustainability. I look forward to India's active engagement in these and other high-level initiatives as we move through the session. Distinguished colleagues, let me close by acknowledging once more India's enduring commitment and exemplary leadership in multilateral affairs. India's G20 presidency marked a historic milestone as the first ever to usher in the African Union as a permanent member, a critical step towards a more just, more inclusive, and effective multilateralism, and which sent a strong signal of solidarity across the global South. For 7 decades, India and the UN have been key strategic partners in navigating global challenges, such as rapid population growth, and yet, through the years, remarkable progress has been achieved in sustainable development. Time and again, you have put forward your most precious resource, your people, in support of the UN's noble ideals and principles, its timeless values to promote and ensure human dignity. As I mentioned earlier, this includes the first woman president of the General Assembly, Ms. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, in whose esteemed footsteps I follow, and whose reputation for integrity and tenacity I can only hope to match as I discharge my responsibilities. On behalf of the United Nations, and more particularly, on behalf of the General Assembly, I should like to thank India for its exceptional contributions to humanity and count on its continued involvement as we chart new pathways to a more peaceful, more prosperous, and more sustainable world for everyone, everywhere, without distinction. I thank you most kindly.
Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj had to leave the event due to a prior urgent appointment. I now hand over the proceedings of this event to Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, DG ICWA, and request her to moderate and chair the Q&A session.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Excellency, for your remarks, your very insightful remarks, which covered the priorities of your presidency, Excellency, as well as giving highlighting the contemporary issues that face the world and which need urgent attention. Excellency President, you have agreed to take some questions. So what I would do is I'll take 3 questions at a time, and then we see how the time goes. So I open the floor to questions. Please identify yourself, and no big commentaries, but questions, please. I see a hand right there. You take that right there. That's a hand. One there.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, President, for that insightful lecture that you gave us. Uh, I have a question that is, in a world that is far more interconnected, yet bitterly divided, how would you look at the effectiveness of the UN in context of the geopolitical rivalries impeding its functioning? Thank you.
Thank you. I see a hand there.
Good evening to all present. A very warm thank you to His Excellency for his enlightened words. I'm Anubha. My question to you is, emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence are opening new prospects for development as well as raising serious ethical issues. India has called for putting in place international governance for the use of AI. What role do you envisage for the UN in the global AI governance system? Thank you.
Thank you. And one more question. I see a hand here.
Good evening, everyone. His Excellency, my question is that multilateralism is not possible unless we think globally. There are countries which are still not a member of UNO and they are site of conflict. What strategy do you think to follow to bridge this global gap? Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. The floor is yours.
The question over here sought to address the effectiveness of the United Nations, given the highly connected nature of the world. There is no doubt. Let me begin, first of all, by saying the UN itself is not impressed with its performance. This is not a secret. This is not a secret. Now, I would invite you, though, to bear in mind that the UN is not some esoteric organization out there in outer space. The UN is an amalgam of member states, of which there are 193, that shape global policy in a number of areas that are critical to the welfare and well-being of man, particularly, though not exclusively, peace and security. And when the challenges arise, as they do, it's largely because a member or a group of members of the 193 members make a decision to violate the law. The UN does not violate the law. The UN promotes compliance with and acceptance of the law. But countries do, whether we like it or not, and we don't. The reality is that countries do, in the exercise of their sovereign will, choose to violate the law. One such violation, a flagrant violation, was the invasion of Ukraine. That was a decision. And that is why the General Assembly of the United Nations responded with such vehemence and alacrity that this must not be allowed to stand, because it's a rule-based system that is based on the principle: if you accept the obligations and responsibilities of membership, which you have when you joined, then you are obliged to uphold the rules. It cannot be one set of rules for me and a different set of rules for you. The rules are the rules. The rules create stability, predictability, and stability. Important for development. Development does not take place in a vacuum. When there is global insecurity, as exists now, development pays a price. So even though the SDGs were trending off track before, think for a minute about the composite impact of COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, supply chain disruptions, rising inflation, and the uncertainty of war and the possibility of regionalization of the conflict in Gaza. It is not a good atmosphere. It undermines trust, it undermines confidence in the system. On top of which, you have a Security Council paralyzed to take the decisions necessary, to take the decisions that it is mandated to take on behalf of the international community to promote and secure international peace and security. So, when you talk about the effectiveness of the UN, which of course is a matter that the UN itself is constantly assessing, it has to, it should, because our focus, our main constituency, not the only one, but our main constituency is the 8 billion people who live on this planet, to secure the planet and to make them secure in their lives. But when you have these conflicts and crises that create instability in the system, then multilateralism comes under extreme threat. It's not the atmosphere in which that best suits deal making. Because guess what? The thing about multilateralism is that no one gets everything it wants out of the system. In fact, in order to achieve an acceptable outcome, everyone has to contribute something. So you pay a little bit. You choose to give up maybe a tiny part of your sovereignty in order to enjoy larger benefits that would be shared among the entire commonwealth of countries. And so what tends to happen in the public domain, however, is that the UN gets judged to a significant degree based on the performance of the Security Council. But the UN is more than the Security Council. There are two other important organizations. One is the General Assembly, and the other one is the Economic and Social Council. And also bear in mind that the UN has a mission on 3 pillars. People often forget that. To promote human rights and to promote development. So it's not just about war, as important as peace and security is. It's fundamentally important because, as I've said in the statement, an investment in peace is an investment in development. And so when the Security Council fails to act through paralysis, the general tendency for people is to say, the UN has failed. It's not entirely fair. But while the Security Council might be paralyzed, work is taking place in the General Assembly, often on the same issues. That is why, for example, in the case of Gaza, while the Security Council had not been able to agree a resolution on the situation in Gaza, I'm very proud to say that the General Assembly reached a very powerful resolution on Gaza that attracted the support, I believe, of 141 member states of the UN, calling for an immediate ceasefire, calling for the immediate return of all hostages, and demanding that the Israeli authorities facilitate the provision of humanitarian aid and assistance to those who need it. Now, the General Assembly went on to approve a second resolution on Gaza, specifically on the humanitarian situation. But it took a resolution from the General Assembly to motivate the Security Council enough to agree a resolution on Gaza after, I believe it was 4 or 5 attempts. And so this notion of effectiveness of the UN has to be weighed and assessed in that context. There is a lot of disaffection, and rightly so, with the Council. It's not working, it's not fit for purpose in 2024. The geopolitics has changed. Unhappily, what tends to happen, what is happening in the Council, is that bilateral political tensions get imported and contaminate the work of the Council. We don't like it, but it's the reality. And that only adds to the undermining of the system, because decisions in instances of the most egregious humanitarian distress do not take place, giving the impression that the United Nations is insensitive to what is going on the ground in Gaza and in other theaters of military action. It's not the case. So there's no doubt that the UN can work better, and there are processes, ongoing processes, to enhance the effectiveness and the impact of the work of the UN. But I've just come from a visit to Uganda, for example. And I believe later on today, I have a meeting with the UN development system in India. And I can tell you, I don't know the details of the story in India, but what I saw in Uganda, the delivery of services and support that change people's lives, that give them hope, that lift them up, that give them dignity in Uganda, really, in my view, causes one to come to the conclusion that the UN has considerable effectiveness and impact on the ground in countries where support is urgently required. That is why someone like Madeleine Albright would say, if the UN did not exist, it would have to be reinvented. Because the work that is done by the UN on the ground in countries across the world that no other organization, and some often in difficult circumstances. Can you imagine that in Gaza alone, 153 UN personnel lost their lives? Can you imagine UN personnel in Gaza, when the bombs started dropping, were taking their young children to work with them? Do you know why? Because they did not want to take the risk of leaving their children at home their preference was, if I have to die, I want to die with my children. That is the level of commitment. And through it all, as the bombs were dropping, these UN operatives were doing their jobs in the service of humanity. So when we talk about political effectiveness, bear those dynamics in mind. They're warning me about time, because when I start on these issues, I can go for hours. The other question was on AI, the ethical dimensions of it. And it's an extremely important question, because there's no doubt that AI can deliver extraordinary benefits to development, can make life much better, improve the circumstances, and improve the results that lift human welfare and well-being. But there's an edge. There is an edge. There's the potential, for example, for private data to be used in ways that are unethical and unprincipled. Private companies should not have ready access to our private data, particularly when they can use and manipulate that data to cause us to change our consumption patterns, so that you suddenly find that if I like catch water, and somehow this becomes known, I'm suddenly getting catch water advertisements on my cell phone. And it's everywhere. These are things that need to be considered very, very carefully, because they pose risks to society. And that is why the Secretary General of the United Nations has had the wisdom to establish two large bodies. One is a scientific committee to advise on the science of it all, but there's another larger committee comprised of lawyers, doctors, anthropologists, economists, thought leaders, ethicists, in order to create the guardrails that will ensure that artificial intelligence does not come to dominate society in a way that is destructive and undermine the social fabric of the society. So those are very important considerations, and I would invite you to follow closely those negotiations, because they are, while they will make a quantum difference in our daily lives, there is that risk of danger and threat to stability in society. I'm sorry, I did not get the details of the last question. Could you quickly repeat it?
Excellency, I think we are running out of time here, because your next engagement is 5:30. I do know there are lots of questions and many unanswered questions from that have already been asked, but because of time constraint, I will be constrained to close now. But let me say, it has been an extremely, extremely enriching discourse. Your remarks have, I think, brought a greater amount of understanding in the audience today about the role both of the UN General Assembly, of which you are the President, Excellency, and how agenda items have come to the General Assembly and then the Security Council had to take note of them. Excellency, I apologize to our audience that I know you have a lot of questions, but His Excellency has another appointment and he needs to reach there. So I would request everyone to give a standing to applaud and to give a standing ovation to the President.
On behalf, sorry.
Let me just say in closing how very appreciative I am for the opportunity to engage with the Indian Council on World Affairs and to ask those of you who have questions. We have a link on our website, Ask the PGA. Please send your questions to that link. We guarantee you an answer within 48 hours. I myself approve the answer. We might need a little bit more than 48 hours if you all write at the same time, because our staff is limited, but I can guarantee you that you will have an answer. And the last thing that I'd like to say to you is to maintain your engagement with multilateralism. Multilateralism is for you, and it needs you. It needs your support, it needs your ideas, it needs your passion, and it needs your vision for what is possible when countries and communities and people work together in unison to create common outcomes that benefit us all. So this is not about individualism. This is about communities and people lifting each other up so that we can all live a life secure in peace and harmony with self-respect and human dignity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Only one house. This was a very limited time you gave
Yes,
to us. But
yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
On behalf of the Indian Council of World Affairs, I would like to express our gratitude to His Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis, President of the 78th UN General Assembly, for taking the time out of his busy schedule to deliver the 47th Sapru House lecture at ICWA. I take this opportunity to also thank the members of the audience for their participation and request you all to join us for tea in the foyers outside the auditorium. Thank you so much.